What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my Week 9 Top 25 video. To be quite honest with you guys, making the Top 25 and ordering them is pretty difficult. But the 25 teams that are in my poll, I feel very, very confident, and so confident, in fact, that I do not have an honorable mention list this week because I just really didn't consider anybody else to be putting in my top 25 here for this week. So there will be no honorable mention. So we will dive straight on in to my top 25 after I tell you how you can continue to support me here. And thank you so much for all of you that do support me already in whatever way you do so. If you are new to the channel or you just want to help support me a little bit more than you already are, which I greatly appreciate, you can go ahead here on YouTube and just interact with the channel in any way you can. That's hitting the subscribe button and ringing the bell down below, here this video, so you are up to date with everything I upload, and you want to be if you're as big of a college football nerd as I am. But you can also like, you can comment, and you can share, and I just want to say thank you for taking time out of I'm sure your busy day to simply watch this video. And if you want to support me otherwise, you can go give me a follow on Twitter. It's at TailgateNate29, and I'm going to try to post a little bit more about games I call, articles I write, and just everything else I do within the sports media realm. So thank you all for all your support. And now let's dive on in straight into my top 25. Again, the 25 teams that made my top 25, I really don't see anyone else fitting into the top 25. If you want me to list some honorable mention teams, I mean, Duke, UNLV, maybe South Carolina, maybe Nebraska, but I really didn't think any of those teams up to this point have earned a spot within my personal top 25. It's the same 25 teams the AP poll has in. I double-checked as soon as I made this poll with the AP poll that came out that same day. And, well, they ended up actually being fairly similar because what I did last week, the AP poll did this week. So I was a little bit ahead of the curve on this one, but Vanderbilt, for me, has stayed at number 25. Yes, they struggled with Ball State, but you take a look at a couple performances out of the Vanderbilt Commodores so far this season, and I mean, they're absolutely justified of a top 25 ranking. Of course, that win over the Alabama Crimson Tide is going to be huge. They have a win over Virginia Tech, a road win against Kentucky, and they went toe-to-toe with the Missouri Tigers, at the time a top 10 team, who needed double overtime to beat Vandy. Vandy is a team that I absolutely think deserves a top 25 spot. I won't continue to talk about it as much as I did last week because I kind of detailed why I had him in my poll a lot this past week. But Vanderbilt has really impressed me. Just one of the greatest stories in college football this season. Diego Pavia is absolutely a wonderful, wonderful quarterback here for this team. And I was a little bit ahead of the curve here. So Vandy, for me, stays at 25. However, Army and Navy, I said I couldn't rank either of them last week because it just felt wrong. It felt like you had to bring one of these two teams, or you felt like you had to bring these two teams in together. That's exactly what I have done this week. Again, for the first time, I really sat down and watched Army and Navy and sort of just said, okay, let me see what this is about. Let me see if they are the real deal. Yes, I had watched highlights and clips, as I have of pretty much every team so far this season, but I actually sat down and watched a full 60 minutes, at least most of their previous football games, for Army against East Carolina and for Navy against Charlotte, and I mean, wow. I was thoroughly impressed with Army. I was thoroughly impressed by Bryson Daly. I think he is just an exceptional quarterback and is going to lead Army to do great things this season. Both of these defenses are absolutely extraordinary, and Navy has a lot of really good offensive playmakers of their own. Now, why is Army above Navy, you ask? Well, I was a little bit more impressed with Army, and I do love Bryson Daly a little bit more than any of the other weapons that Navy has, and Army has also played one more game. Army is 7-0, while Navy is 6-0. Navy's got a big one coming up against Notre Dame this week, while Army, I do believe, has themselves a bye. That is correct. They do have themselves a bye. Oh, and by the way, Vanderbilt, they get a chance for another top upset because they get Texas at home. So watch out for that one, Texas. You're in a little bit of trouble. We know what Vandy can do there before Diego Pavia puts that team on his back again. It's going to be dangerous for Quinn Ewers and the Longhorns. Vanderbilt is a legit team this year. Otherwise, I've sort of kind of started to do one of the things. I have a couple of these moments every year where I just kind of sit back and look and, reevaluate the way that I rank some of these teams. And for me, this was just sort of one of those weeks, and it ended up leading Missouri to fall a couple of spots. Again, I'm not confident in Missouri really being a top 25 team. They do play Alabama on the road this week, so maybe not a huge penalty if they do lose that game, especially if they're able to keep it competitive. But you just look at some of the performances that Missouri has had, and I know, yes, one of the performances struggling to beat Vandy, beat them in double overtime in that game, beat a Boston College team only by 6, and they've proven out to be pretty solid, but not as good as a lot of people thought they were going to be. They got plastered by Texas A&M on the road, and then they struggled with Auburn at home. They needed a last minute, kind of 2-minute drill-ish scoring drive to go down there and win that game. Now, it wasn't quite that, but they definitely needed some help there, needed a couple of plays to be made, and ended up beating Auburn kind of last minute wise. And Missouri just has not impressed me this year. I think Brady Cook has got to play better. They've got to get more from their wide receivers, and they have to get more from that defense there as well. If that doesn't happen, well, I think Missouri is going to lose to Alabama this year, and they're already one of the teams that is not really in the big conversation to make the college football playoff. Yes, of course, they're still there. They're still a team that can do it, but they don't really have many more chances to pick up signature wins. This week is one of them when they play the Alabama Crimson Tide. And SMU has jumped up one spot here to number 21 because Missouri did fall. Hey, SMU got a really big one here coming up this week. They go on the road to play Duke. Don't discount Malik Murphy and the Duke Blue Devils. That's a really solid team, like I thought they were going to be this year, but SMU has really started to get on a groove and figure everything out offensively themselves as well. Watch out for the Ponies. They're a real contender in the ACC after plastering Stanford this past week, and that means Pitt, the undefeated Pittsburgh Panthers, did jump up one spot here to number 20. Now, Pitt did have a bye this past week, and a pretty big one coming up for them on Thursday against the Syracuse Orange. That'll be one of my preview videos that comes out tomorrow, because Syracuse and Pitt, both of them still fairly up there for contenders in the ACC. Pitt more so than Syracuse, but Syracuse is absolutely a team that can go ahead, and if everything works out right, they can make a run to get to an ACC championship game. Got a lot of opportunity for some signature wins coming up there on the schedule. But Pitt is another one of those legit teams. Eli Holstein at quarterback has been absolutely phenomenal for them. That defense really starting to step up and play well. They've had to avoid a couple upsets here and there, a couple comeback wins for Pitt against Cincinnati, West Virginia. They were able to fend off Cal in their most recent game. Again, big one against Syracuse. Thankfully, though, for Panther fans, they do have it at home. Illinois picked up another big win this past week. Michigan still could not find their quarterback rhythm, and the Illinois Fighting Illini were really able to take over. I don't really have much more to say about the Illinois Fighting Illini. They did not move for me in my latest poll, as I, again, sort of just kind of reevaluated. But again, Illinois' only loss is to a Penn State team that everybody has within inside their top 5 as it currently stands. When you take a look at the Illini a little bit deeper, huge opportunity for them. A game against Oregon coming up this week. Oregon, the new number 1 team in the country, according to the AP poll, and you'll figure out what I think here in just a little bit. But when you go ahead and you take a look at what the Illini have done so far this season, Altmaier's played well. The defense is playing up to par. Really like the Illinois Fighting Illini this season. Ole Miss, again, fell a couple spots in my sort of reevaluating on how I did rank teams. And I mean, look, this is an Ole Miss team that I think it's just got to be able to put some things together a little bit better. Their offense has not been as explosive as it was in the first 4 games of the season. They have yet to eclipse 20 points. Not 20 points. They've yet to eclipse 30 points in their previous 3 games. Something that's got to change for the Ole Miss Rebels. I think the defense got to step up and play a little bit better. Couldn't really hold down the game against LSU as well as they wanted to. And Boise State, even though they did not move, they did jump a couple of teams. There was just one team that ended up rising above Boise State, and a couple of the other teams, you could probably figure out who it is by the thumbnail, which led Boise State to stay at 17. But I don't think that's a bad spot for the Boise State Broncos either. The other game, besides Pitt and Syracuse, that I will be previewing on my channel tomorrow, at least hope to, again, that is tentative, that's my plan, is Boise State's clash with UNLV. Again, one of the teams that you could argue deserves a spot in the top 25, very likely probably is that first team out of the top 25, if not then it's the Washington State Cougars. But UNLV, absolutely a team. They pick up that win against Boise State, then UNLV. Even though they had the whole thing happen with Matthew Sluka, that is still a team that if they can beat Boise State, they can run the table. Is a team you absolutely need to consider to get in the college football playoff as the group of 5 representative. Big game for the Broncos coming up, but Ashton Jeanty, man, he's been on a tear so far this season. Kansas State is here at number 16, and yes, they did drop a spot, but I actually think Kansas State, as the season is going along here, is starting to get a little bit better. Now, did they put themselves behind the 8 ball a little bit? Yes, with that loss there to BYU, but one loss is not a killer. Yes, BYU and Iowa State still control their own destiny, but if Kansas State can beat Iowa State on the road in that final week of the season while running the table the rest of the way as well, it would be Kansas State having that tiebreaker win over Iowa State. They would be in the Big 12 Conference Championship game. And Avery Johnson, well, he's been starting to play like the quarterback that a lot of Kansas State fans wanted to see out of Avery Johnson this season. He's really starting to come along, play nicely. DJ Giddens still doing his thing. The secondary sneakily is starting to improve. I know it didn't have the best game against Colorado, but that's all Colorado does is throw the football. The rush game is not very good for the Buffaloes. So when you go ahead and you take a look at just a ton of the other things that are happening around the Kansas State Wildcat program, this is the team overall that is improving. It is getting better, even though they fell one spot from last week. The team that absolutely could be in the college football playoff conversation there down the line. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at where things stand in the top 15. I mean, Alabama's at number 15, and who would have thought? Who would have thought that we would ever live in a world where Indiana football, not basketball, football is ranked higher than the Alabama Crimson Tide? I never thought I would see the day, but that's absolutely why we love college football. Indiana is absolutely the real deal after plastering Nebraska 56-7 this past week. Indiana has a very manageable schedule the rest of the way. They got a big one against Ohio State, second to last week of the season, and we do hope that Curtis Rourke is okay because he is a huge part on why that team is so successful, especially offensively. But Bama's got still some defensive questions to figure out. I think they still got some offensive things that they want to get figured out as well. Jalen Milroe did not have his best day. The offensive line continues to be a problem for the Crimson Tide this season. And year one of Kalen DeBoer still being fairly successful. Definitely not up to the standards of Alabama quite yet. But again, Bama, I think if they run the table and win out the rest of the way, still has a fairly decent shot to get into the college football playoff. 2 losses in SEC play might have taken them out of the SEC championship game race, but who knows? The SEC is going to be really chaotic this year. Already touched on Indiana. Phenomenal offensive team, and Curt Cignetti, absolutely to this point in the season, is coach of the year, and there's no doubt about it in my mind. I know some people are arguing Matt Campbell, arguing Kalani Sitake, arguing this, that, and the other. No, not even close. It is Curt Cignetti, without a shadow of a freaking doubt. Indiana is an absolute wagon this year, and if they make the college football playoff, don't discount them, because I think that's a team that can be really, really sneaky if they're able to slip in to the field of 12. Texas A&M did not move for me from this past week. I mean, just a pretty blah performance from Texas A&M in their game this past week. They went on the road and played Mississippi State. Probably should have been a little bit farther apart on the scoreboard, but I know Mississippi State might prove to be the worst team, at least standings-wise, in the SEC. That's a team that's proven that they can fight. They fought against Georgia. They just fought against Texas A&M, but a big one for the Aggies coming up this week when they have to play the likes of the LSU Tigers, the only 2 undefeated teams left in conference play within the SEC. That's definitely going to be a really, really fun one there, I believe, from Baton Rouge, although I could be wrong, and I was wrong. It is going to be from College Station. So tune into that one, because that one's going to be a whole lot of fun. But the 2 front runners within the Big 12 Conference are sitting here at 11 and 12. Why aren't any of them in the top 10? Why aren't both? Because there are teams that I think are deserving of the top 10 ranking a little bit more than those 2, and they're just teams that personally I like a little bit more. But that's not me discounting either Iowa State or BYU. These 2 teams, again, I've said it multiple times throughout this video and in my weekly takeaway video, if they take care of business, both of those teams are in the college football playoff and are in the Big 12 conference championship game. And these are two legit teams. Matt Campbell has got himself a squad, and Kalani Sitake has got himself a really good side with the BYU Cougars. Now, I don't really think that, again, you look at the rest of the way, the reason why they're not top 10, some of their resumes just don't necessarily compare with some of the other teams that I have in the top 10 currently. You can maybe argue that they look a little bit better than Miami, and sure, well, I will give you that. I think Miami overall is a little bit more talented than both of these two teams. If you have Iowa State or BYU or both of them within your top 10, I am not going to argue with you, but this is my top 25. I can do what I want. I am putting my foot down, and to me, Iowa State and BYU, while they are still two excellent football teams, fell just shy of the top 25 for me. Again, you take a look at what these teams have coming up here. I mean, BYU's got a dangerous one against UCF this upcoming week. Well, I believe the Iowa State Cyclones are on a much-needed bye week before you take a look at what happens in Week 10, where they play the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Not a game to discount by any means. Let's go ahead and dive on into my top 10 here, where I do have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at number 10. Nate, how can you put Notre Dame above Iowa State and BYU, even though they have the loss to Northern Illinois, this, that, and the other? Point heard, point absolutely heard. Again, this is why this is my top 25. If you want to have Iowa State and BYU ahead of Notre Dame, I'm not really going to have a huge problem with it. I, in fact, don't have a huge problem with it. But to me personally, I'm a little bit more impressed with Notre Dame than I have been with Iowa State and BYU, especially over the past couple of weeks. And you take a look at some of the wins that Notre Dame has. I mean, they got a win on the road against Texas A&M. Iowa State and BYU don't really have a win that necessarily compares to that. Yeah, BYU has got a win on the road against the SMU Mustangs, but Texas A&M is by far and away the best team that I think out of any of the three, Notre Dame, Iowa State, and BYU, has played, and Notre Dame got that win by double digits on the road. Yes, the loss to Northern Illinois is bad, but ever since then, Notre Dame has not really blinked an eye. They got a good home win over a Louisville team I know a lot of people are discounting right now, but they still have a lot of solid pieces on the road against Georgia Tech. That's not a hard, or I should say, that's not an easy team to play either. That was a really hard game for them. And Notre Dame has both Army and Navy on the schedule. And even though USC is kind of faltering, going on the road to play in the Coliseum is going to be seen as a fairly quality win for Notre Dame. Now, it probably won't be in some people's eyes, but that still is a tough place to play in a rivalry game setting. And I like the way that Marcus Freeman's squad is playing. That is why they are top 10 to me. A lot of the other teams have remained in my top 10. LSU jumps up one spot here to number 9. They did not have as much trouble with the Hogs as I thought that they were going to this past week. So congratulations to the LSU Tigers. I mean, yes, their one loss is to a USC team that is kind of falling off right now, but still at the end of the road, it could look like a pretty solid loss. I mean, it doesn't right now. It doesn't look like the greatest loss. Again, Notre Dame going on the road to play in the Coliseum probably isn't going to look like the greatest win, but it's in a tough, hostile road environment. You guys understand what I'm trying to say, I'm sure, but the LSU Tigers move up one spot for me. They were 10 last week. They're 9 this week. Big one coming up in Aggieland against Texas A&M. 2 only undefeated teams left in SEC competition, at least, again, in conference play. And then the Clemson Tigers move up here to number 8, while the Miami Hurricanes fall to number 7. A lot of people think these two teams are on a collision course in the ACC, and, well, I'd be the mind to agree with you, but I'd also be that mind to tell you, don't discount SMU, don't discount Pittsburgh, and don't even discount Syracuse, Duke, and maybe even Virginia Tech. Some of those one-loss teams, if Miami or Clemson happens to slip up, and Miami has been very close the past 3 weeks. Probably should have lost against Virginia Tech. Probably should have lost against Cal. They didn't lose either of those games because Cam Ward put the frickin' team on his back. And then a back-and-forth game against Louisville in which someone was going to need a defensive stop, and it was Miami that ended up coming away with it. Clemson, ever since that Georgia game and maybe a couple games afterwards, they've been really good offensively. They've been one of the best defenses in the entire country. The Hurricanes and Tigers, right now, top 10 teams for me, sitting there at 8 and 7. I did drop Miami below Tennessee because even though Miami is undefeated and still overall playing some pretty good football, I think they got some defensive things they want to work out, and I think, to me, they've got to convincingly start to win some of these games that they should win. They should have probably beat Cal by a whole lot more. They probably should have beat Virginia Tech by a whole lot more. And I mean, the way the offense was clicking, if the defense played better, they would have pulled away from Louisville a whole lot earlier. The Tennessee Volunteers, welcome back into the top 6. They're not back into the top 5 quite yet, although it definitely could happen. What a performance against the Alabama Crimson Tide. Nico Iamaleava did not start out well, and overall did not have his best game, and still has yet to throw for over 200 yards in SEC play. But Dylan Sampson was really good. This Tennessee secondary, even though they got kind of exposed a little bit, 239 passing yards allowed, were able to come away with 2 interceptions and a big one there late in that game to help seal the deal. They tried to carry the goalpost away from Neyland Stadium for the second time in 3 years after beating the Alabama Crimson Tide, but they were stopped. I don't think those goalposts made it out of the stadium, I am sad to say. There's already a pair of goalposts in the Tennessee River this year, and the sort of PD and everything said, nope, we only need one set of goalposts in the Tennessee River. You guys did it 2 years ago. It was really cute. It was really fun. We don't need to do it again. We already have our own set of goalposts that we dug out of the Tennessee River. We don't want to do it again. And Tennessee fans kind of had no choice but to oblige by that. So, okay, jokes aside, Tennessee is a legit football team this year, guys. And if you didn't already think that before the Alabama win, well, you have to think it now, right? And they have some other pretty solid wins under their belt this season as well. Tennessee, I do believe, has got a bye week this week. That they do. But still a couple really interesting games coming up for the Tennessee Volunteers on their schedule. I know they still got to play Georgia. They still have to go on the road and play Vanderbilt. But, I mean, Tennessee, they should take care of business more often than not, and it should lead them to a spot in the college football playoff if they continue to play like this. And the crazy thing is, Tennessee can definitely play better. They absolutely can play better, but to me, they've been more impressive than Miami, which is why they have jumped the Miami Hurricanes for that 6th spot. But again, the top 5, same 5 teams, but it just feels like every week this is going to be an order that shuffles. Now, may not shuffle this next week, but the week after when Ohio State and Penn State play, who knows, it definitely could shuffle. But these, to me, clearly are the top 5 teams in the country. In what order you have them, I think is still very highly up for debate. What I don't think is up for debate is that as it currently stands right now, Oregon is the number 1 team in the country. Georgia has a loss on the resume. Oregon doesn't. Oregon has got some games here down the road that, I mean, I would not necessarily be worried for, but, I mean, Oregon still has to play the Illinois Fighting Illini coming up. A road game against Wisconsin probably doesn't look that tough right now. Camp Randall's a really tough place to play. You got the rivalry game against Washington. I know Michigan is not the best team right now, but on the road in the Big House is still a tough environment to play in. So Oregon has still got a couple of those games, but for the most part, they should be able to take care of business and get to the Big Ten championship. Same thing with the Ohio State Buckeyes, except for that Penn State game, maybe even the Indiana game. Ohio State, I think, has got to watch out for the Indiana Hoosiers. I don't think Michigan's as big of a threat as they seemed at the beginning of the season, but they still got Penn State. You got an interesting one coming up against Nebraska this week. Indiana is still on that schedule, and thankfully for Buckeye fans, that game is being played in Columbus, so maybe a tiny sigh of relief there on that one. But then even Penn State has got a couple of games to where, I mean, look, Penn State can absolutely drop. They still got that one against Ohio State, and their luck against the Buckeyes, besides 2016, has not been great in recent memory, especially in Happy Valley. That was announced as a big noon kickoff game. Hey, they got to go on the road and play in Madison this week. That's going to be a night game. I'd watch out for that one. On the road against Minnesota. Minnesota's capable of pulling off a pretty big-time win, and with the chaos of this year, saying, oh, they should beat Minnesota, they should beat this team, they should beat that team. Yep, they should, but Alabama also probably should have beaten Vanderbilt. They didn't. So this is just one of those seasons where the unpredictable can happen any given week. Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State. Besides the obvious games, Ohio State, Penn State against each other, the Buckeyes against Indiana, Oregon against the Illinois Fighting Illini this week. Dig a little deeper. There are some chaos games for all 3 of those teams coming up, but we just saw Georgia and Texas play out on the football field, and Georgia came out on top. The run game, still not fully fixed, but it got a whole lot better this week, I think, especially from the eye test, and that Georgia defense. My goodness, it came alive this past week and ate this highly touted, coming into this game, highly touted Texas offensive front and Quinn Ewers alive. It ate them alive. I absolutely love what both those teams are still about, and I still think they're top 5 teams. Right now, to me, though, there's no question that Georgia is the number 2 team in the country. To me, it goes in this order. I think Oregon 1, Georgia 2 is kind of set in stone by a lot of people throughout the country, but Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, I think you can kind of shuffle those teams around, and I'm not really going to argue there with you too much. Again, no honorable mention slot this week, but if you want to go back and look through any of my top 25, feel free to do so. Hey, we'll start preview predictions hopefully tomorrow. Don't quote me on that because my schedule does change a lot, but hopefully I'll have a couple weekday games out for you tomorrow. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder, and I'll see all you guys in my next video. Goodbye.